Good morning. Happy Saturday. Pull up, get your coffee ready, get your good juice, get your bottle of water. We got a treat for you today.
Oh,
Happy
always.
Saturday. Yes, I know we do come through. Happy Saturday. All right, let's just go ahead and get started while the good people join us. So, I am Dr. Quinyon Scott, and I am here with
Christina Cook, the Washington Post Teacher of the Year.
Yes, Washington Post Teacher of the Year. And this is a sidebar. So the applications are out for Washington Post Teacher of the Year. I think they're up in April. So for those of you that are interested, get them essays together.
Yes, honey.
Have someone nominate you. You too have an opportunity to be Washington Post Teacher of the Year. So today, it's going to be juicy. Before we get into our juicy topic, we do have a disclaimer that what we share on the show today does not represent the organizations that we work for, nor the institutions that we attended, but we are speaking of our values and what we believe.
Mhm.
So before we begin, Cook, I didn't share this with you, but I found out yesterday that one of my childhood friends that I grew up with, her son was murdered.
What?
And yeah, and so I don't know if you have like the friend in high school, but you remember like out of all your friends, the first one that like had the baby,
Yes.
and you were like, that baby became kind of like everybody's baby.
Everybody's baby. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, oh, the first baby, that kind of thing. And so I definitely, yesterday I was just thinking about their family. Because of Facebook, I've been able to remain in contact and like not just cool with like her, but
Mhm.
like her mom. I called mom, her aunts, like just like love the family.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I don't know, it was just so heartbreaking. And it's like, we hear this ongoing conversation about, you know, black on black crime. You have to cover your black boys. You're just so
Mhm.
concerned about, what's gonna happen to your children. And I think that there's this association
Mhm.
between what is happening in our society and school. And
Mhm.
so this leads us to today,
Yep.
which is, why are urban schools failing? And so when you think
Whew.
about like the reason, right? There's a ton of reasons. Let's just like we could brainstorm a few reasons.
Yep.
Um, one could say that many Americans believe that urban schools are failing to educate students they serve. So
Mhm.
there's a specific population of students that they serve. And as a result of the population that they serve, that's the reason why we're failing. That could be,
Mhm.
one aspect of it. Um, the other aspect of it is, sorry guys, we're having a little technical difficulties this morning. I'm trying to share the good show with my good partner here, and I'm having a hard time, so bear with me here.
Okay, you know what? We good. I got you now. I'm just gonna share. We good.
You sure? Because I
Yep.
it's loading.
Okay. When I clicked on that you're live, now I can just go ahead and share from my end. I just want to make sure I'm checking the chat for all of our folks. And we got our usuals on today. So I want to honor their thoughts and make sure that they get elevated. Their voices are elevated on today. And
Gotcha.
yes, I said on today.
On today. Yes, that's church.
Come
So
on.
I'm sorry. Wait a minute. So that was our commercial break for this morning. I'm going off on tangent, but let me get us back on tangent, right? So, all right. So the idea is that urban schools are failing
Mhm,
to educate. And one of the reasons why they're failing is because of the growing challenges of educating urban youth. And
mhm,
so one would argue that the reason why we're failing to educate is because there's a group of individuals teaching this specific group of youth,
yeah.
and there's a disconnect. So we don't, and I'm going to speak for myself because I can remember my first years of teaching, there was definitely some things I just didn't connect with.
Yeah.
And so I argue that you don't necessarily have to understand their plight in order to be a good teacher, but we can save that conversation for a minute. So ultimately, this is the question. Do you, well, let's just start with why are urban schools failing?
So I think like the big elephants in the room are resources, engagement, and like time, right? Like those are the elements we often talk about. Some of those things we can't really control, right? We can't control necessarily how much income a particular school is going to get because that's already been predetermined and dictated by, the officials of that particular area, right? When we talk about engagement, in some ways we can't control whether or not a parent shows up with that student and participates. In the sense we can't force or mandate that to happen. And then when we talk about like time, we think about like teacher turnover, teacher retention rates. In some ways we can't control whether or not a person's going to stay or they're going to leave, because we've seen it in all situations. We thought it was a great fit for someone, but they found something else, right? But I think today, what I want to talk about, Scott, and really hone in on is what we can control, and the part that teachers can control with either contributing to a failing system or not contributing is how we show up and how we interact with our clients. And you and I talk all the time about public speaking, and we talk about our consulting work would take a look and knowing our audience. And rule number one of public speaking is to what? Know who you're talking to, because it's a sale. It's education, y'all, is business at its finest. And what we're selling is this dream. We're selling an opportunity to learn and to grow, and we're selling and giving kids opportunity, right? And hope. And so I think the part that we can control is how we show up and present that through to students through our contents.
So I'm going to give you some pushback, right?
Yeah.
If the operations of the school are wonky, and if the leadership is wonky, then is the teacher empowered in an urban setting to still show up and be beneficial to the students they serve?
Yes, because they're getting a paycheck. And when they signed the contract, it didn't say, if your leader does what they're supposed to do, then you do what you're supposed to do. That contract says, or agreement, right, whatever we want to call it, says that you will do these things for this duration of time, no matter what.
But you don't think it's a connection? So
I do think it, but like, let's go there. Let's think about perfect. I got some examples for you. Come on, sis. Let's throw these examples.
Okay, give me the good example.
And by the way, I just want to go ahead and say, Dr. Scott and I are serving up. We are survivors. We not gonna give up. We not gonna stop serving children. Listen, let me give you an example. If a teacher knows that they're not going to return to a building for the next.
Let's just see. I just got the thing that we lose connection.
I think maybe we did. Hold on. We did. It's okay. The enemy trying. We got it. Let's see. Somebody text us. Yeah, Miss Marsh texted me and just said what happened.
All right. Here we go. Let me tag the good old cook.
Marsh is hilarious. Ooh, child, we back.
All right, guys, good morning again. Happy Saturday to everyone. For those of you that were with us earlier, we lost connection. Thank you, Deaconess Boyer, and thank you, Mr. Marsh, for letting
Yep.
us know. We appreciate it. Quickly, we're going to go right back into our topic, but I do want to make sure that we do another disclaimer, which
Yeah.
is that in today's show, we do not represent the organizations that we work for, nor the institutions that we attended. We are speaking from our own values. But we were talking earlier today before losing connection on
Mhm.
why are urban schools failing? And so we
Yeah.
did a little brainstorm about why urban schools are failing. And so now the question that we're talking about is that, can a teacher really show up and be present?
Yeah.
Can a teacher really give their all when the school itself has so many issues? And so, Cook, you were explaining why the
Mhm.
teacher is still responsible for teaching every day and being present, even though everything around her in many cases inhibits her from being 100% her best.
Yeah, so I was giving the example, and again, hey to everybody, giving the example that when you sign your contract, you are signing a series of responsibilities that you as the teacher are going to take care of. That includes lesson planning, that includes sometimes lunch duty, that includes meetings, that includes grading student work, that includes corresponding with parents. Those are things that you don't necessarily need your principal to tell you to do, because those are things as a teacher, you've come to the table with those skills. And if you don't, and in some situations, you'll have a coach or mentor to guide you through that process. The example that I was about to give, Scott, before we lost connection, and ain't nothing but the devil trying to keep us from speaking this good word today, is for the teachers who know they're not returning to that school the following year, right? Because we're in renewal time as we speak. There are teachers who stop doing their job because they're mad about what's going on next year. That has nothing to do with you right now, because you're still in the same season of that contract that you signed when you interviewed in the previous year. And so there is an obligation, right, for you to continue on, even if you feel like the leadership is terrible, even if you feel like it's unfair, you still made a decision and you still have an obligation and a commitment to continue to serve, because that's what you said you were going to do in your interview.
So I hear you, and to a certain degree, I agree. But I'm thinking about, when you're thinking about the biggest challenges facing education, right? So we talked about low student achievement,
Mhm.
a lack of instructional coherence, inexperienced teaching staff, which you talked about, teacher retention,
Mhm.
poorly functioning business operations, and low expectation of students. If I am not returning to my school, there's a reason. Ultimately, my leader believed that perhaps my expectations for students were too
Mhm.
low. I didn't engage students.
Yeah.
My now new priority is to look for a new job. In my world, right? My priority now is I have to ensure that I find a new placement for my position. I mean, for me to have another job, because you need a job to live for most people. So this idea of, I'm going to still give it my best. I'm going to still give it my all, when the actuality is that the average new teacher, 3 to 5 years, they don't have the knowledge or resources in many cases
Mhm.
to really give urban students their best, and so they're already coming with deficits. I just don't think the onus of failing education is truly on teachers.
I
The
don't think it's
onus
only
of
on
failing,
teachers, but I didn't mean to cut you off, Scott. Go ahead, finish, sis.
no, it's just not on teachers. And I hate the fact that systems blame teachers, because it's truly not a teacher issue.
But
My
let me pull a teacher issue, and I hear you, and I appreciate this. We got this tennis match going on today, and I'm grateful for when we have spirited debates, because our audience loves it, even though we really do love each other. Um, I'm thinking about the teacher who doesn't grade consistently. That's not a leadership issue. That's an organization issue, right? So when we're talking about impacting student achievement, one of the ways we know a kid is doing well is through their assessment. So if kids don't know how they're doing because you got piles of paper stacked up to the ceiling, that's not on your principal, that's on you. because you made a commitment that you would grade papers. So I'm thinking about things at a very, very like micro level that teachers can control and use that to drive instruction. Now, to your point, and I do agree with you, everything rises and falls on leadership in the sense that, you know, the building's going to move and flow with what the leader is doing. But each one of us are called to be leaders in our own rights in our individual classrooms. Because think about it, Scott. The teacher who writes the most referrals, what do we honestly think about what's going on in their classroom?
They have an inability to teach or inability to have classroom management.
Yeah, so we're like, they're not a great leader. So we put these stigmas then on people who we feel aren't great leaders, even when they're using systems that they need to support them in driving student instruction.
All right. So the example that you gave in reference to the papers, I 100% agree with that.
Okay.
My push is going to be this. So when I think about students in the inner city and they face poverty, violence, often daily, and I'm thinking about the number of teachers that disconnect with the dysfunction that many of our families go through.
Yeah.
The results in students who need a great deal of emotional support from their teachers, if the teacher is unable to make a connection with that student or provide that emotional support, does that help deteriorate the failing schools?
I think yes and no, right? And I'm gonna play both sides.
Okay.
So first question I have to ask, anyone who chooses to work in an urban district, I want to know why. Because again, we are survivors. We not gonna give up. We not gonna stop. Just in case y'all missed my singing the first time. When you choose urban education, you are signing up for war. So when you choose to sign up for war, there's this expectation that you come to the battlefield because you want to fight some things. Now, whether you come with all the skills or we're going to give you some of those skills, you have some understanding that you're going to have issues in an urban setting that you may not see anyplace else. So that's number one. So I'm thinking, okay, it may not be the teacher's responsibility, but when you sign up to teach in an urban district, you are signing up for some challenges. That's number one. Number two, part of those challenges involve your ability to relate to your audience. So let's just say you are, Susie Q from, the suburbs of whatever neighborhood in the US of A, right? And you've had both your parents, great home, great upbringing, and you don't know poverty from a pissy elevator to roaches and coming out the cereal. You have no experience with that. How can you then relate to a student who comes to school and says they're hungry or they couldn't eat because they had roaches coming out of their cereal?
But so I don't feel like you have to be able to relate. So I can't relate to that. Like I've never experienced having a box of cereal with roaches coming out. I've never experienced living so impoverished. I have a good girlfriend, and I can remember when we were in college, she was talking about the mice and rats that they had in their home. And she was like, her and the rats got so cool, they used to braid her hair. And we laugh about this all the time. But she was like, oh, we were cool with the rats. She was like, because you had to be friendly with the rats in order because it was them versus you. And I can't relate to that, right? That wasn't my experience. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in a white neighborhood called Stanton Heights, where all the trees turned at the same time and all the grasses were cut at the same time. Like most of the families in the neighborhood were 2-parent households, so that wasn't my experience. My father would like at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning would wake me up in the middle of the night, like, look, let's go. And we would go on a ride. And so he would take me to a place in Pittsburgh called the Hill District. So if you've ever read anything of August Wilson, there is this connection of the Hill District. And there would be, drug addicts out, people on the street, and he would say, do you see this? This is The Walking Dead. And he would create scenarios for me not to take wrong turns based upon the examples that I saw on Center Avenue as members of The Walking Dead. And so I say that I don't think you have to have experienced this level of poverty in order to connect to students. I think that you have to have this passion for humans, right? So
Correct.
I want the best for you. Because I want the best for you, it doesn't matter that I don't know where you come from, nor can I connect where you come from. What matters in urban education is that I want you to be successful. And
But I
because
think
I want you to be successful, I'm going to go above and beyond for you.
But I think you make a great point, Scott, but let me push here. By your father giving you that experience, that was your connection. And so because you saw that and you saw the impact of that, that allowed you to say, nah, I don't want that for me. And I don't want that for any of my students, because I know, being one of your teachers, you'd be damned if a teacher didn't show that type of empathy and compassion to a student that was underneath your leadership. They couldn't work for you. You weren't going to have that. Let me give you an example. I won't say her name, and because we got too many folks that we know so well on here. Dr. Bagley, I see your comments, and I'm gonna elevate you. And we got Mr. Marsh with her petty ass. I'm not even gonna say names, but she knows who I'm talking about. You know who I'm talking about. When the kids said, they just keep joning on me. And what did we tell that teacher? Joan back, right? So she had all the content knowledge, but she didn't have the bread and butter to connect with our students. And it was a challenge for her. You know who I'm talking about, the one who was, we used to bet what day of the week she was gonna not come to work. I still owe you a pack of Chico sticks. You still don't know who I'm talking about?
I know you still owe me a pack of Chico sticks, but I don't remember who you're talking about. I really don't. Once I leave an organization, it's so hard for me to remember people. Like, I think it's a gift and a curse. Like, I literally have no idea who you're talking about.
I'm not going to say much more, because once it's on the World Wide Web, it's on the web. And let me look, the pettiness in the chat. I can't stand Dr. Bagley, you ain't nothing right now. Marsh, you ain't nothing right.
But no, let's get back on track. I do think this is a valid point, because this idea of connection is, we blame a lot of failings. We blame a lot of teachers that fail on this idea that connection. I mean, we've talked about this before, that if you're not Black or you don't connect to Black students, then you can't teach our Black children. When the truth of the matter is, we know quality white teachers that have done well by Black children.
We do, but see, here's the thing. There's something about that quality teacher that makes them quality. There's something extra about their ordinary. I'll give you a perfect example. We had a white teacher, man, best loved white teacher we knew, because he would twerk. He knew about go-go music. He knew about Washington, D.C., and he brought that love into that building. Right? When we had a pep rally, who do we call on? This one particular teacher, because kids adored him, because he was able to connect. I guess you and I are debating being able to relate and being able to connect. I can't relate to poverty, because you and I both, we didn't grow up that way, but I have a connection that this may be this kid's entry point. And if my job is to get them to learn something, I'm going to have to meet them where they are and then take them over to where I want them to be. But I can't ignore it.
I think that's a great point, that a lot of times teachers have a hard time meeting kids where they are.
Yeah.
Especially if you are teaching high school, but the child lacks quality reading skills, you then judge that student based upon where they are. And here's sometimes where it's truly not the student's fault. In the past shows we've looked at, is it the parents' fault? So let's go back to TIF, right? Is it the parents' fault? Is it the school's fault? But here's a situation where it's so much bigger. I just did this study, and the study was in DC. And it's on failing and closing schools.
Yeah.
So it's 600 students, and 600 students were negatively impacted when a school closed.
Yeah.
Those 600 students, 400 of them went to another school in close proximity.
Mhm.
In a year later, that school closed.
Yeah.
So now you have 400 students in the District of Columbia, and they're negatively impacted because 400 of those students have been at 2 failing schools.
Yeah.
200 and some odd number of those students go to a third school.
Mhm.
Within another 2 years, that school fails. So now you have 200
Yeah.
plus students between K-8, and in a matter of 5 years, they've experienced 3 failing schools. Now,
Mhm.
those are just the schools that have actually closed. Think about the number of students that go from school to school,
Yeah.
but the school never closes, but it's truly still failing.
And that part, Scott, we're not disagreeing about the impact of the leader who was once a teacher on the district and on a group of kids. But I think specifically we were honing in on teacher responsibility. Like if we want to shift and talk about the leader's responsibility, I mean, heavy, what is this quote? Heavy is the hand with the load. What do we always say?
Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
That, yeah. But then we, so it's like what we talked about last week about wanting the STEM program as the head of school and then trickling down that vision all the way down to your janitors. How do we impart that vision on everyone? So I'm wondering, and I'm throwing back to you, because you've been in school leadership for years. Who's holding principals accountable for how they lead and manage their teams?
I mean, the reality of it is that it just depends, right? So, if you work at a large district school, the actual district is holding the principal accountable. And then oftentimes, to a certain degree, parents are responsible for holding the principal accountable as well as other stakeholders.
Yeah.
I think, in our case, when we worked in the District of Columbia, there is the principal, and then there's like the executive director, and that executive director has a board. They often hold the principal accountable. But I would argue the biggest accountability to any school leader are the test scores, because this is the deal. Right. For the average, it goes synonymous. If your test scores aren't good, then the leader isn't good.
Yeah.
And so the leader is responsible for pushing achievement.
Yeah.
And if achievement is not met, then there's this huge gap. And so when you look about failing schools, the biggest issue with failing schools is achievement. And then we look at, well, whose responsibility is achievement? And although I truly believe with everything in me that it's a partnership between the school and the home, the truth is the onus is really on the school.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not at all, because, and I've heard and I've seen, did you do everything that you could do as the teacher? And I often wonder, when we can't do any more, then where do we push?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the teacher's responsibility, and especially going into, well, we're still in COVID, but as we transition back to schools with COVID, and I'm thinking about the CDC requirements are saying, you have to be mindful of open spaces. So in many cases, many schools are not going back into the dining hall cafeteria situation. Students will eat in their pods in their classroom, like many of them are doing now. Of course, it may change in the fall. And so when you think about the onus that's on the teacher, right? So it's one thing to teach.
Yep.
Now you're maintaining breakfast or lunch. In some cases, you're maintaining breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yeah.
And then the teacher has the burden of the social emotional support that goes along with, like, you got to meet the social emotional in order for you to even teach them.
Correct.
And everything that's happened in the past year, the social emotional is so much larger than the actual content knowledge. So
I agree.
how is a teacher, so we put all this onus on the teacher, but the truth of the matter is, how does a teacher balance that? And it's incumbent upon the leader to provide the scale of what balance really looks like, so the teacher doesn't become overwhelmed, because it's so easy to several things. One, you go to what you like, right? So if you are a social emotional being and you like speaking truth to kids, then you just sit there and you just have this dialogue about social emotional, and the student lacks content. If
Yeah.
you love your content but you're not in touch with your own emotions and you're that extreme, then you never tap into the social emotional. So
Yeah.
the leader, specifically in this moment of time, if never before, has to be willing to create this true balance,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
that they're helping their staff build this transition, because it's going to be this huge transition of how does a teacher really meet the needs of a student, so that we are not in a more dire situation than we are now. We
Mhm.
already have thousands of schools failing.
We
We're
agree.
already in a situation where there are huge gaps between us and our white counterparts as
Mhm.
far as educational needs. Then we've had a year where it's been online school, and many of our students have not had access to online school.
Yeah.
How do
I
we ensure we don't fail anymore?
I want to, I'm gonna comment on that. I want to elevate a couple comments from the chat because they're blowing us up, which is awesome. So Dr. Bagley said urban schools are failing because most were founded on white ideologies, and even with Black leadership or being in the Black community, the governance at the top, the rule book is white thought. So Dr. Bagley, thank you
I
for
agree with
elevating. Thank you for elevating that. And I want to give a shout out to Miss Wendy Gibson, one of my homegirls I used to teach with right here in Anne Arundel County. Shout out to Miss Gibson for holding it down in Anne Arundel County. Still holding it down as a great math teacher. Miss Wendy Gibson just said that's a great point. The assessment is one of the ways an educator navigates to reteach and find new methods to teach students. And then Aaron Scott elevated because we are a part of that community, Miss Cook. Let me see what else. We had some great comments, Scott. I'm just trying to make sure I get to everyone who said
I have a
something.
laugh for you that Aaron Scott's my brother-in-law.
Hey. But to your point, like, how do we manage that? So this is what I'm thinking about. This totally just popped in my head. The only time we really focus on child development is in the lower grades, right? When you really hear teachers and school leaders discuss the importance of child development is like ECE and elementary. And then something happens in middle and high school where we no longer really hone in on what is happening to kids developmentally during those times. And let me tell you why I know that's true, Dr. Scott, because kids do things and teachers want to write a referral because so-and-so farted in their class, or because so-and-so called out, or because so-and-so did something that's just age appropriate. And so it's making me think and reevaluate like teacher preparation programs and training around child development and social and emotional learning. I think that should be at the cusp of what we're doing, because again, if we can't connect, right, you may not be able to relate, but if we can't connect with kids, we're not going to have any power. I mean, if you just think about it on a spiritual, metaphysical level, in order to have power out your socket, you got to connect. And if there's something wrong with the socket, you're not going to have any electricity or power. And so I'm thinking at the source of all this, the root is how we actually see children.
I agree. And then not just like when we think of child development, we think of adolescent, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a situation that I know Dr. Bagley will remember. We had a student who there was a video of the student masturbating, right? And so other people got this video. And
Oh
so
my gosh, we sure did.
and so the question became like, what do you do with the student who is, teenage, early teens, and others are seeing this video of this, student masturbating? Well, so the question became, do you suspend the student, right? Do you give the student community service, or do you just have a conference with the student's parents? And I remember really grappling with the decision about what was going to happen with the student.
Mm-hmm.
And as I really dug a little deep, it really came down to, this is the behavior for this particular time frame.
Correct.
right? So I'm becoming more familiar with my body. I'm touching myself. I want to let this other person know that I'm interested. So I am going to give them something that I think appeals to them.
Yeah.
And so I think that when you look at development in school, that should be something that, like, in the first 2 weeks where we have a billion things to do, that
Yeah.
is something that we really look at, because specifically now, our generation is kind of appalled with this sharing naked pictures and all this other kind of stuff,
Mhm.
but it's really the trend. Like, let's just be honest. People don't want to admit this, but it's really the trend. It's really social media, no limits. Let me give you everything I got. Like, that is a huge part of the generation. And I think that there needs to be this connection, right?
Yeah.
Where the generations connect. So you're not like appalled judging the student moving forward. The student
Correct.
now has this negative impact in the school community among the adults, just because there's this lack of understanding.
Yeah, I think, we talk about like those first 2 weeks of preparation prior to coming back to school. I think we need to reevaluate how that time is spent. More time I think needs to be spent around the main priorities, which are student emotional learning, right? Child development and curriculum. And we spend a lot of time on procedural things, right? To-dos, check off, what do we call it, Scott? We're getting ready for like introduction of school, duties, schedules, those kind of things. Those things matter, but we don't get a chance to talk about the crux of things that really impact what we're doing. And then here's the follow-up, right? What happens after those initial PDs? How do we then follow back up and come back in 30 days and reevaluate those plans like every 30 days to see how we're doing? So I think, how do we fix some failing schools? And, we don't know. We're just throwing ideas out here. I think planning, preparation, leadership, and then accountability on the plan, right? How many times do we say we're going to do this? We set out to do it, but no one follows up. And then we don't do the plan, do review to see where we need to tweak, how the plan is really going. Once we get into the swing of school, everything kind of falls to the wayside. And I think that's in all your schools, not just in the urban districts. Even here where my kids go to school, there isn't always enough consistency. I'll give you an example, and this is a little bit off topic about just follow through. Teachers always do well, I'm gonna give you the first quarter to get yourself together and get yourself acclimated, right? And then they get upset later and they're like, well, now I'm starting to take off for late work. Well, if that was part of your policy from day one, then you should have enforced your policy from day one, versus I'm gonna give you all these chances, and then when you're not meeting the mark, now I'm gonna penalize you on the back end. So I think, there's some level of like accountability, child development, and connection that we need, that's missing.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's one thing to be a school leader and you're working in like your microcosm of that school. And now that I have an opportunity to see like an entire sector, right?
Yeah.
I see we have 126 schools in our sector, and I have a chance to see like those that are truly succeeding,
Mhm.
those that are barely making it,
Yeah.
and those that are just failing. And one of the things that is a true staple is planning. And I'm thinking about, we just had a leaders meeting on Tuesday, and one of the things was preparing for opening up school next year.
Mhm.
And so I'm thinking about, in this 2-week session, literally having a facilitator come in and helping you plan, and not just plan for the 2 weeks, but plan for the entire year, right?
Yeah.
So you already know the days you're going to be off. You already know these big buckets that you want to talk about, and stick to the plan. And what I see is that those schools that have this cycle where they are clearly planned and stick to the plan, those schools are truly leading, versus where the other schools that are like, oh, PD is in 2 weeks, let's plan right now. And so you really don't have this true essence of what deliverables you want all stakeholders to get,
Yeah.
because you're trying to still fly the plane
And
while you're
build it.
designing the plane.
Yeah.
Becomes very, very difficult. So I just say that I think this is a great time for us to say, I encourage you to hire us, right? Hire, take a look. We definitely can begin to support you in your planning long term, and identify what your school needs are by doing a needs assessment. And this is the deal. deal. Just because the majority of urban schools are failing, there are also urban schools that are doing very well.
This is true.
And so we need to be mindful that all schools are not failing. There are some schools in urban districts who are knocking it out the water and or the ballpark, if you will. And so our time has been up. We appreciate this great banter. It's what makes Take a Look wonderful. And thank you so much to everyone who
Yes.
tuned in on this beautiful Saturday. At least it's beautiful in this area. And so, Cook, any last words for our good people?
I'm just grateful, Dr. Scott, for the conversation, not only that you and I have, but that folks that Take a Look have. And I just want to just say to all of our educators who listen in, to all the leaders that listen in, like, listen, you are valuable, you are important. And Dr. Scott and I are here as resources to support you as you go forth to build this next school year. So please reach out to us. You all know you can find us on Facebook or on Instagram, and we want to help. So thank you so much for making this a success for us.
All right, good people. Happy Saturday.